case of creepy dolls have spanned all across the internet and the world since, well, forever. Many of you may remember instances on 4chan, such as the DIY Sally Acorn Love doll, constructed from human bones, the one that was made out of felt or lint, and even the all-time classic, Tara, the singing android. Creepy DIY dolls and companions have been around on the internet for years, made for either simple companionship, odd fetish purposes, or in the case of this segment, art. The subject of this topic comes from a 4chan X post from 2008, regarding a rather unique art project. The OP explains that they're seeking opinions or advice on a life-size dummy that the OP had constructed out of plastic wrap and packaging tape. The way the OP fabricated this dummy is by wrapping their body in layers of plastic wrap and tape, then cutting themselves out of it, and once done, they would cut off the mold and tape it back together, and then gave the doll a set of clothes, what they described as a really fucked up makeup job, a cheap blonde wig, and a name: Carol. Once giving Carol a backstory and personality, the OP began to treat the doll as a real person, bringing her to school with them, to which they explained that the other students and staff were rightfully creeped out by Carol, especially the art teacher. The OP does explain that Carol was intentionally made to be creepy as a part of the particular art project that they were working on. However, that did not stop the art teacher from explaining to them that he doesn't want Carol in the art room anymore. When the OP asks why, the teacher explains that one night while they were staying in late at the school, Carol had been in the corner of the art room. However, once the art teacher stepped into the office just for a moment, he noticed that Carol had moved from the corner of the room and instead allegedly positioned herself, or itself, right next to the door to the teacher's office. The OP did the teacher a favor and took Carol home. But that solution did not seem to work, as OP's mother, and even OP themselves, were too creeped out by Carol to even want to keep her anymore. Despite this, the OP was conflicted on whether to get rid of her or not, stating that they did need her until at least the next Tuesday to finish the project, which involved taking photos of her. The OP also mentioned that they had worked so hard on Carol, and how that made it even harder to get rid of her. By this point, the thread had exploded into people demanding pictures of Carol and questioning the authenticity of the doll and OP's story in question. However, the OP kept their promise and stated that they were off to take photos of Carol and to finally destroy her. You may think that this is where the thread pretty much died off, but for the first time, OP delivers. It was at this moment we finally came face to plastic wrap face with Carol. Not only did the doll match the description that OP had provided, but it was completely accurate to how they described Carol. Wig, clothes, fucked up makeup, and all. OP goes on to deliver a brief description of what exactly had happened afterwards, explaining that the doll was created during a time of the year in which the division of our plane of existence and the metaphysical plane of existence at itself were at its thinnest. The OP mentions that due to this act of treating the doll as if it were a real person, it allegedly started to conjure a bad aura around it. Essentially, OP let something enter our world and used Carol as a vessel of sorts to do God knows what in our plane of existence. Because of this realization, the OP and their friend had taken Carol apart after the photos for the project were taken, and placed her body parts in several different dumpsters around their hometown. Many on the thread began to mention that OP had created, and in turn, destroyed a haunted doll of sorts. They praised OP for the story and photos, as well as the fact that OP had dismantled the vessel and then placed the parts in separate locations, thus preventing it from possibly putting itself back together once again. Now there's two possible theories for this. There is the Tulpa theory and the haunted doll theory. To help me with this, Yoshimi is here to explain the haunted doll theory.
So I personally have a couple theories regarding the possible hauntings that could have gone on with OP and the Carol doll they had created. Haunted dolls and doll-related hauntings are some of the most popular and frequent types of hauntings in the paranormal and supernatural world. The concept of and the accounts of these said hauntings allegedly began to gain popularity around the early 20th century, with several accounts of manufactured dolls or stuffed animals supposedly having paranormal properties, as well as the rise of the living doll genre we were seeing around the time in cinema with films such as The Poltergeist, Child's Play, Dolly Dearest, and more. Some of the most popular paranormal stories involve haunted dolls, and many of you watching may know about Annabelle, a Raggedy Ann doll given to a student nurse in 1970, which allegedly exhibited strange properties. The nurse was told by a psychic medium that the doll had harbored a spirit named Annabelle. Thinking the spirit was simply the soul of a little girl who once owned the doll, the nurse and her roommate began to attempt to nurture the doll. Despite this, Annabelle would exhibit malicious and even frightening behavior, to which famous paranormal investigation duo Ed and Lorraine Warren were contacted to move the doll to their museum, stating that it was instead demonically possessed. There is also the case of Robert the doll, possibly the world's most famous doll haunting case, which details the story of Robert, a doll owned by American painter and author Robert Eugene Otto. The doll is said to exhibit the ability to move, change facial expressions, and even make audible giggling sounds. In the case of Robert, the haunting allegedly came from sort of a ritualistic haunting depending on the legend, either being cursed by a woman and gifted to Robert Otto as a child, or that the doll's supernatural properties were triggered by Otto's negative energy exhibited towards the doll. So in essence, it could be that the Carol doll OP had made was the result of a demonic possession allowing itself to manifest and take control of the doll itself. While plausible, it is apparent that the OP did not use any sort of ritualistic practices to conjure a spirit within the doll, nor did the doll that they made out of plastic wrap come with any evil or malicious energy tied to it. But the OP did actually conduct a practice that may or may not have manifested supernatural properties to exist within the doll itself.
And as for the Tulpa theory, Tulpa is a concept that exists in mysticism, theosophy, and the paranormal in which an object or being can be created using supernatural and mental powers. The practice involves creating a being that has its own personality, its own thoughts, emotions, and its own sentience that is completely separate from the host or practitioner. While Tulpas and Tulpamancy is a spiritual practice spanning hundreds of years, in more recent times, it has been co-opted by internet users on sites like 4chan and Reddit as a means to conjure imaginary companionship, with communities referring to themselves as Tulpamancers, and providing support and guides to newer practitioners. The Tulpa community has gained some popularity within the last 2 decades, with notable instances including the adult fans of the cartoon My Little Pony practicing Tulpamancy in order to form manifestations of the show's character as a means of having, let's just call them imaginary friends. Modern Tulpamancy is a controversial subject, with practitioners often citing loneliness or anxiety, or even claiming to have had romantic and sexual experiences with their respective tulpas. While many do believe in the spiritual and supernatural aspects of it, it has been mostly associated with other neurological and psychological explanations, including dissociative identity disorder, and, in some extreme cases, schizophrenia. However, let's take a step back and assume that OP of this thread had no prior psychological conditions or disorders, and had no real concept of what a tulpa was. Could they have accidentally manifested a being of negative energy that then began to make its presence known to other people in OP's lives? Taking a look at the facts, the OP had stated that they began treating Carol like they were a real person, giving her a backstory and, most importantly, a personality, establishing some sort of emotional connection by the end. The OP never elaborates on the extent that they went about this practice, other than bringing Carol to school, but we can assume that the OP may have done things, like spoken to Carol, referred to Carol as though it was a real person, and even spent a lot of time around Carol prior to the doll's destruction. So, going by the properties of Tulpamancy, the OP had spent enough time with Carol to the point where the doll's energy was beginning to make itself known, through how people around OP would express disdain and uncomfortable feelings around the doll. And, even in one extreme case, the Tulpa physically manipulating the doll to move towards the art teacher's office door. However, OP was smart enough to elaborately destroy and separate the doll's parts. Going by the logic of Tulpamancy and spiritual manifestation, the OP may have very well initiated the beginning stages of creating some sort of malevolent being separate from anything on our plane of existence. Or they possibly allowed for something from another plane to breach through to ours. Ultimately, it is a rather intriguing example of an artist's own project turning against them. As for if the story itself has any legitimacy or not, I'll leave that up to you. Regardless, we are left with the photos of Carol, serving as a stark reminder of what can happen when we start to believe a little too much. I would just like to give a huge shout out to Yoshimi for helping with this video. If you're an avid supporter of disturbing topics, I highly recommend you to go over to Yoshimi's page, as he covers really unique and dark topics. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I'm Time6, and this is the Maverick Files. Have a good night.